Anneliese Michel was born September 21st, 1952, in Liefing, Germany. She was a devout Catholic who attended church twice a week. In September of 1968, at the age of 16, she passed out while attending class for unknown reasons. Later that night, she had her first seizure. It would be another year before she would have another seizure, and her parents would take her to a neurologist for examination. At this time, she was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, but no form of treatment was offered to her. Although the diagnosis meant that she could suffer from spasms, memory loss, and hallucination, doctors didn't think it was frequent enough issue to warrant a treatment plan. As time went on, she only got worse. Between 1969 and 1970, Michelle suffered from tuberculosis, pneumonia, pleurisy, tonsillitis, and issues with her heart and circulatory system. On June 3rd, 1970, she had another bout of seizures while she was in the Mittenberg Clinic recovering. It was at this time she started receiving medication for her mental and physical health issues. It was also at this time that she first begun to question her ailments and whether or not they had a paranormal origin. She was praying and she saw a demonic face appear before her. It was enough to cause her to not pray anymore. When she moved away to college in 1973, things got even worse. She heard voices damning her soul to hell and heard knocking sounds. She was forced to return home and quit her schooling. Frustrated after 5 years of conventional doctors and being unable to treat her ailments, her family turned to the church looking for answers. Most of the priests they spoke with encouraged her to continue the path of medical science. Her father took her on a trip to the San Damiano Church in Assisi, Italy, in 1973, and Michelle refused to enter. She said that the ground burned like fire and the images of biblical figures blinded her with a piercing white light. It was around this time that her mother also witnessed her eyes go black as she stared at a figure of the Virgin Mary. They continued to plead with priests for intervention, finally convincing Father Ernest Alt to take on the case. He took one look at Anneliese and said she didn't look like an epileptic. In the Catholic Church, exorcisms require the approval of the bishop of the diocese, and Bishop Joseph Stengel refused to give his approval and once again encouraged the family to contact doctors. Things got even worse, if that's possible. She began destroying religious items around the house, eating spiders and coal, and she even bit the head off a dead bird in the family's backyard. She crawled under the table and barked like a dog, refusing to leave for 2 days. Bishop Stengel finally gave his approval and asked the family to keep it quiet. Being as this was around the same time as the release of the movie The Exorcist, this may have contributed to the bishop's decision. Publicly, the church was very critical of the movie. Exorcisms, especially in the 70s, were very controversial. Nonetheless, Father Alt finally had his green light, and in addition to the approval, Bishop Stengel appointed a priest named Father Arnold Renz to assist in the rite. The first of many exorcisms occurred on September 24th, 1974. In total, 67 exorcisms were performed over the course of 10 months. During this time, Anneliese stopped eating, saying that the demons would not allow it. She would also repeatedly drop to her knees in prayer with such force that she ripped her tendons and shattered bones in both legs. She was covered in bruises, had broken teeth, and her nose bled constantly. Throughout the months, she would argue with herself in different voices as the exorcisms were being performed. She claimed to be possessed by Judas Iscariot, Christ's disciple that betrayed him, Cain, the murderous son of Adam and Eve, the Roman Emperor Nero, Adolf Hitler, and a disgraced German priest from the 1500s named Valentin Fleischmann. Finally, she was possessed by Lucifer himself. Now, it's noted that these names could have just been there to induce fear in the priests, and that they were not the actual souls that had taken possession of Anneliese. Either way, it was Anneliese's belief that she was suffering for the sins of the youth of her generation and for the sins of the priests of the Catholic Church. She said that she was visited by the Virgin Mary and told that this was her fate. When she wasn't talking during the rites, she would vomit or scream in agony. Her body would go rigid, or at times she would throw herself against the walls. She predicted her own death, saying that her suffering would end in July. Her last exorcism was June 30th, 1976, and her mother found her on July 1st, deceased in her own bed. Autopsies found that 23-year-old Anneliese Michel weighed only 68 pounds at the time of her death. Malnutrition and dehydration were the cause of her passing. What's interesting is that the autopsy of her brain found that she was healthy. There was no damage present that would cause epileptic seizures. Her parents and the two priests were arrested and stood trial. The court deemed her mentally ill and argued that the exorcism actually made her worse, playing into her delusion. The church, on the other hand, truly believed that this was a case of demonic possession and they were doing the right thing. They played the 42 recordings of the various exorcisms of Anneliese as proof. The court was unswayed. Her parents, Anna and Joseph Michel, were found guilty of negligent homicide, but were not given any sentence as the death of their child was deemed painful enough. Likewise, the two priests were found guilty of negligent manslaughter and given 6 months. Their sentences, however, were dropped. Now, I'm not here to say whether or not this is a real case of possession. It is a case that has been extensively studied and has strong believers on both sides. Here is just a small example of the recordings of Anneliese. Even though the recordings are in German, you don't need to speak the language for it to send a chill up your spine.